when you're meditating, you can't even tell that you have a brain. The existence of your brain is not among the things you can notice while meditating.
I want to get your reaction to a quote by you. So the first one is something you said. You said, wouldn't it be really good, since all you ever have with you is your mind, to make a friend of your mind? I want to compare that quote with this one from Einstein, who said, no problem can ever be solved from the same level of consciousness that created it. And so I guess the question is, what does it mean to make your mind into a friend? And if you can explain that, does that also couple into maybe what Einstein was saying? How could you transcend the brain, quote unquote, our conscious experience? How could that even be practical? In other words, are we not doomed because we're locked inside of our brain, but maybe not, according to Sam Harris, because you could make your mind your friend? So how could you reconcile what Einstein said with what you said, perhaps, or use what you said as a tool to help us transcend the level of consciousness we're born with?
Yeah, well, I certainly wouldn't say it's a matter of getting outside the brain. I mean, again, I think we can be agnostic with respect to the metaphysics here. I mean, just the ontology, just how is consciousness and mind related to matter? At what point does it emerge? I think with mind, in terms of its functionality, I mean, things like perception and memory and the association between ideas, an ability to abstract ideas, reasoning, all of that is clearly a matter of what our brains are doing, right? Because we know we can disrupt all those functions by damaging or impeding the certain processes in the brain, and all of that is increasingly well mapped. And outstanding mystery here is that it should feel like something or be like something to be associated with any of that processing, right? Which, i.e., the mystery of consciousness. So I think it's unclear how consciousness emerges, and I mean, what are the necessary and sufficient conditions for the lights to come on. But for things like vision and language processing, etc., we know this is a matter of information processing in our, the biochemical system of our brains. And I think there's every reason to connect back to the AI conversation for a moment. There's every reason to believe that is substrate independent, right? There's no reason to think that there's something magical about a biological system. We should be able to process that same information in silico, and those same functions happen. And as we see in the intelligent machines we've already built, it's not a matter of getting beyond the brain in any way. There are different levels to it. One level is just thinking differently, right? I mean, just having new ideas and reaping the benefit of their consequences, framing things differently, telling a different story about your experience. I mean, being able to triangulate on yourself and see yourself as others do, or see yourself as you see other people. I mean, one thing I've said on this topic is that on some level, wisdom is really nothing more profound than an ability to take your own advice, right? I mean, we all are pretty good at giving advice to other people. If your best friend sat down with you and said, listen, I'm really unhappy, you could probably give a lot of great advice there. And if you only took that advice yourself, 100% of it, you would be living your best life too, right? It's probably not very different from the advice you would give yourself. It's operationalizing and executing all these good ideas that is really the challenge. Everyone knows how to lose weight, right? There's no mystery anymore about how to do that. This really is just physics. Even if there's maybe some ways that are better than others. It's not a matter of cutting off your limbs, right? You have a certain energy balance, and if you eat less and exercise more, and you do that consistently, you're going to change the shape of your body eventually. And yet, many people, virtually everyone who's not marketing their accomplishments on YouTube, finds this very difficult to do, right? And so that's the problem. I think with Einstein's quote, the one place I would demur is that I don't tend to think of levels of consciousness. I think of consciousness as a single condition, and the real differentiator is in its contents, right? I mean, there can be consciousness with basically zero contents, and there can be consciousness with contents of a sort and capacities by virtue of that contents that we can't even imagine. Creativity and insight that is so far beyond what is normal for us that we would find those disclosures, if put into English, fairly unintelligible, right? So, but everything, all of our personal changes with respect to what we do and what we want and how we think about our lives is a matter of changing contents. However, the real benefit of meditation and the way one engages it is not so much a matter of addressing contents as contents. It's recognizing contents, whatever they are, and learning to kind of drop back into this condition of purely witnessing experience, and discovering an intrinsic freedom there that is native to consciousness, whatever its contents, right? So the thing that's very interesting about meditation is that its benefits are not dependent on changing the character of your experience in any specific way. And I mean, this can sound paradoxical because recognizing this more and more does have a tendency to change the character of experience. But the freedom you find in meditation, the freedom from self, the freedom from reactivity, isn't in and of itself a matter of changing the contents of consciousness. It's a matter of recognizing, simply witnessing experience without reacting to it, without grasping at what's pleasant or pushing what's unpleasant away, and recognizing the intrinsic freedom of just that open awareness and its ultimate non-duality. I mean, this is where it can sound a little spooky, but this is where the sense that there's a self, a subject that is aware of objects, is the thing that ultimately you're interrogating with meditation, and that's the thing that breaks down, and you begin to experience a freedom from that contracted feeling of self that's constantly appropriating experience and reacting to it and trying to improve it. It's a project that is somewhat orthogonal to this other project of improving experience, right? Which is a story of the kinds of changes you can make to your experience based on behavior and ideas and relationships and all the good stuff you can find in life and all the bad stuff you can successfully avoid. Right. Well, yeah. Let me take some pains to differentiate my approach to this from Deepak's, because it is quite different. I mean, if we're talking about meditation and awareness and consciousness, we can sound like we're saying some similar things, and we might actually, in fact, be saying similar things about the nature of meditative experience, but we're not drawing the same kinds of conclusions metaphysically from them, right? So, I tend to not draw any conclusions about the cosmos from what one can experience in meditation. I just think that it's unwarranted. There's no necessity to do it, and I just don't see the intellectual basis by which to do it, right? But you can make profound insights into the nature of mind from the first-person side while meditating. And again, psychedelics are also another tool here, which have been useful for many people. They're different, and we can talk about the difference as I see it. But there's no question that perturbing your nervous system in this way by changing how you pay attention, or by pharmacology, or by many other experiences, can show you at a minimum that it's possible to have a very different experience of yourself and the world. Some of those experiences are transformative at every level, whether it's in your relationships or in just your relationship to yourself, or in your very sense of what a self is. I mean, it goes very, very deep, and it can be very, very interesting and rewarding to explore. And yet, when you're meditating, you can't even tell that you have a brain, right? I mean, like, even your own existence of your brain is not among the things you can notice while meditating, right? Much less its significance, right? If you can't draw any direct first-person conclusions about your own nervous system, how is it that we can imagine that you can say anything about what happened before the Big Bang, or any other, answer any other question of cosmology, right? And that's a move that Deepak tends to make, right? He will talk about the pure consciousness you can see in the darkness of your closed eyes. That is the very thing that preceded the Big Bang, right? That all of a sudden you're doing physics by meditating. That is now. It's not to say that in the limit, as we approach something like a completed science of the mind and something like a completed physics, we might discover something interesting about the ontology there of mind and matter, which links things up in a profound way, and maybe there's a place where they touch. But it's just obvious that for most of us, most of the time, there's no reason to pretend to know anything about the universe on the basis of what you can experience directly, just paying attention to what it's like to be you. But what you can know a lot about is what it's like in your corner of the universe. I mean, you are part of the universe. You are this physical system that is illuminated by consciousness for some reason where you sit. And in this corner of the universe, I mean, only you are seeing the universe. I mean, you're the universe on some level seeing itself from this position, right? I mean, there's no real boundary between you and the universe physically that's important, or that it ultimately demarcates you from the rest of things. I mean, the boundary of your skin is nominally where you think you start and stop, but even there, you're exchanging matter and energy ceaselessly with the world around you. And the truth is, when you look closely at your subjectivity, you don't tend to bound yourself at the boundary of your skin, right? Most people don't feel identical to their bodies. They feel like they have bodies. They feel like they're riding around in bodies as a kind of passenger. You're in relationship to your body in some strange way, right? And that's, from a scientific point of view, that doesn't make a lot of sense. I mean, if you're a materialist or a physicalist, and you think that everything about you and even consciousness itself is just an emergent property of your nervous system, well, then you're going to think, well, it's and it's important that your nervous system be embodied. Well, then you are coterminous with your body. You are your body, right? And so it's just important to recognize that most people don't feel that way naturally. The default sense is that there's a kind of an inner subject, a kind of ghost in the machine that is aware of the machine from some place inside it. But strangely, your body is almost part of the world, right? You're aware of the world. With your open eyes, you see your visual field, and much of what you see is not self, right? And your body is an appearance. Your physical body, that you can see, is an appearance in that same space. You can see your hands, you can see your legs. You can't see your head, but you can see everything else. And, you're aware of all of that from some point of view inside your head, which feels like this unchanging sense of self, this I or me that is riding around and is carried through from one moment to the next amid all of the changing data of experience, changing sights and sounds and sensations and thoughts and moods and emotions. Everything's changing. There's this full display of energy, and yet there's this sense that there's a subject in the middle that is in some way unchanging, right? This sense of I, the sense of self. And that's the thing that ultimately, I mean, in the beginning, you don't really start out targeting that, but, relatively quickly, at least over in Waking Up, the app, we instruct people to look closely at this seeming starting point of being a subject that can pay attention to sounds or the breath, let's say, as an exercise, or a mantra. If you're doing Deepak's method, TM, you're repeating a mantra with the voice of your mind, and the part of you is hearing that. Part of you seems to be saying the sound, and part of you seems to be hearing it. And there's still this sense that there's a meditator in the middle of all of this, doing the thing and noticing changes. But the claim here, and it is a scientific claim. It is you can entertain it as a scientific hypothesis and try to, and just look into it for yourself. The claim is, if you look closely enough at this sense of self, what you're calling I, this feeling of being a subject, you won't find it. And you won't find it in a way that is conclusive, which is to say, you'll find its absence. You'll no longer feel its presence when you look for it closely enough, and you'll then feel what consciousness is like prior to a sense of self, and you'll be able to inspect this kind of boundary condition of the self sort of reasserting itself and then disappearing and reasserting itself and disappearing in a way that becomes very, very precise and very clear and really no longer a circumstance of any kind of doubt. And the analogy I tend to draw here is not a perfect one, but it's pretty close, honestly, with respect to several of the key variables, is to looking for the optic-blind-spot, which many of our listeners will be familiar with, and this is usually introduced at some point in high school. You take out a piece of paper, you make 2 marks on it, you make like a fixation cross, and then you put a dot to one side, and you close one eye, and when staring at the fixation cross, you move the paper into a position where the dot you've drawn disappears because, there's an area in your retina where you're just not getting any data because the optic nerve transits through the retina and there's no photoreceptors there. Imagine. The insight there is that this is through your own first-person experience and with very little setup, just a little bit of guidance, you can do this experiment which reveals something about neuroanatomy that you wouldn't otherwise be able to inspect directly. You would know you're not going to find it by accident, right? There's this deliberate experiment that you have to perform on yourself, and yet it's available. And it's not, the insight is not deep within you. It's actually really right on the surface, right? It's almost too close to you to be noticed without performing this fairly precise way of looking. And meditation on the nature of the self is analogous to that. There's a way of looking for this sense of self. It's harder than this, and you can't really use a piece of paper and a pencil to help in quite the same way. But it can be conferred the sense of absence in the same way that it becomes uncontrovertible with the optic blind spot. I mean, you can perform that experiment enough so that you really do confirm for yourself that you can't see the dot. Right, it's like there is an absence of data there, and you can move it in and out of existence, and you can resolve your doubts about it. And if ever you get those doubts again, you can look at it again, and it's there to be seen. There's something similar with respect to the nature of the self, and much more importantly, you begin to notice that this sense of self is really the anchor for virtually all, if not all, of your states of psychological suffering. Right, and when you drop out this sense of self, there's a profound relief in the midst of whatever negative emotion may have arisen a moment ago on the basis of you being lost in thought, right? So you could have been angry or impatient or fearful or whatever it is, and you look closely for the self that is suffering that emotion, and when it drops away, there's a profound feeling of relief. And so that's why it's worth doing and worth looking at beyond just the intellectual interest of it. It's just the real doorway into an interest in meditation tends to be, you feel worse than you want to feel much of the time. You notice that you just feel crappy. You're talking to yourself all day long about what you want and what you wish you had and what you almost had and what you might have had and what you regret and what you're anxious about, and your bandwidth is just gunked up by a fairly unhappy routine of self-talk, which strangely no one gets bored of. It's like you have endless openness to hear yourself rehearse this argument you had with your wife yesterday for the 15th time this hour, and you don't get bored. But if you were externalizing these thoughts to a friend, for the 15th time that hour, he or she would look at you like you had just lost your mind, and certainly not keep your company any longer, right? So it's we have very weird standards of reality testing in our own minds that if you imagine exporting them to human conversation, you'd be branded as a madman. And meditation is a way of getting some perspective on that and changing your routine.